Okay, this lesson specifically for our Cornet project class shows the application of target, meet, qualify. You literally target, aim at one of the 5 categories in a particular topic you wish to evaluate. I recommend the 8 core elements. This is how Eddie Johnson and I collaborate. We are research assistants for Dr. John Penn, a retired hermeneutics professor from the seminary in Little Rock, the oldest Bible school in the state of Arkansas. Anyway, we take his data, his holistic approach, include everything. We process it, we set it down. And it's rare to find someone with a character to collaborate. Collaborative reasoning, collective learning doesn't always serve the interest of in-groups who, as years ago, a Dr. Steve Brown, a very one time very popular speaker, he was saying it's difficult to win an argument when someone has a vested interest in winning the argument. So Dr. William Lane Craig always said he doesn't want to win the argument, he wants to win the person. So I have theologian and philosopher, for example, use Dr. William Lane Craig, for example, as he's an apologist, a theologian, and a philosopher. And so he goes out and makes formidable defenses, if you will, so much so that I guess famous atheists have engaged in him in a substantial manner. And that's even the neo-atheists today that have such notoriety, or even infamy, if you will. But if you want to just use your English text, which is the only Bible we know, that is the last hand, that is the Bible made by hand. God used men to put that one together before we had technology, computers, and gadgets. So I recommended going backward to find out, can we find argument, can we find numbers? And of course, that's how we were trained to use the historical, grammatical, the lexical, syntactical, keyword being analysis. And so the chronographer, for example, I'll use Usher. He was about dating. And of course, then we had Sir Robert Anderson. Sir Robert Anderson. And a J. Sidlow Baxter. Baxter quoted Sir Robert Anderson's calculation of March 14th, 445 BC to April 6th, 32 AD, the date, the triumphant entry of Christ when he entered Jerusalem, Palm Sunday, I think is how we describe it. So J. Sidlow Baxter said this is proof of inspiration. Well, if that's the case, then if the Bible was divinely inspired and this is proof of it, then this is a formidable argument to take a prophecy. We go into our history, look that prophecy up, as we would notice that prophecy that's in Daniel 9. And as I've said more than once, but Judaizers take so seriously this prophecy that shows to the very day of Christ's entry that they deliberately omitted these particular chapters. I actually have a book. When I go to the library today, I'll look that title of that book. But in that book, after the first few chapters of Daniel, they leave out the entirety of it. I asked a practicing Judaizer here in our local community, and he was willing, and he asked his rabbi at their synagogue, and he returned and said, the rabbi said, oh, we don't need to be talking about all that. That's just, but it's interesting that if it was something that was unintelligible, then why wasn't it retained in the book that was written by a Orthodox Judaizer? So they omitted it. I actually have the other book that surveys books in the Bible, and it mentioned the omission. So I went and verified it. So that was quite indicative that the Judaizers believe this. So much so that as the concern was in the Gospels themselves is that if you don't secure the tomb, people will rumor and go out and spread word far and wide that he's raised from the dead, and we'll have a bigger problem, which was interesting because they were so concerned about the reality of the resurrection that they were taking precautions to try and prevent it and prevent a hoax otherwise, and yet the ones that should have believed it weren't believing it. And so that's interesting if you look at those who oppose. So this is a formidable statement here. Leibniz and Newton, they invented calculus, for example. You can go read that debate if you'd like. And Feynman, the famous, most recent physicist for his fame, noteworthy fame, was the Space Shuttle Challenger when it exploded and was destroyed in 1986. He was involved in the process of finding the root cause. Well, he was in an interview once and he told the reporter, investigative reporter, you need to study calculus. And he said, why? He said, well, that's the language God speaks. So he was not ashamed at all or reluctant at all to associate this with theology. So what we have is, according to history, we have our Bible, which I'm often told you can't prove God from the Bible. It's called circular reasoning. But from the Bible came calculus, theology. So here we have theology. That's a field of study that wouldn't exist apart from the Bible. Then we have these branches of theology: calculus, chemistry, and physics. Even originally psychology by William James at Harvard University, that was developed here in the United States, that is from a Christian theologian. So then from this tamped down to what we have today as technology, and then pharmacology, okay. So my only thought right now is that an A or no? But that's another story. So we have the Bible, theology, and then branches of theology. So at MIT, the first 30 minutes in the class, I know because I sat through the lecture, the professor spent explaining that it was a theologian that developed that periodic table and what we know as chemistry today. So this is formidable when you study and go back and find that people that had a mind capable of inventing calculus, for example, did not find it occur to them to negate the existence of God. We have a philosopher, theologian, apologist who uses cosmogony, which is the genesis of cosmos. Here's cosmological. Those of you that study the languages notice cosmos in here. You notice ontos, you notice teleos, end, ontos, study of being. So this is not all these words are in the Bible, by the way. All the science terms are in the Bible. Bios from biology, zoos from zoology. All of those words are in the Bible, which is fascinating that our science today would not even have a glossary of terms where they did not originate from the Creator's revelation of such data in the Bible. And now we have this history, and I'll put religion. It's fascinating to me that these people's deliberate, willful act and willingness that they've omitted this data shows that it's obviously a threat, their own book, and then they believe it so much that they actually have removed and, if you will, modified their own material. And remember, when it came to numbers, and I'll just conclude with this one, but when people were mocking young earth assertion, for example, and we noticed there's approximately 6,250 years at 12 hours per day. Now, Jesus himself said there's 12 hours in the day. And if you're not careful, you'll go around always saying 24 hours in a day. But we have day and night distinguished in the Bible. So if we include night, and one thing about John the genius, I would never say it to his face, but I'm in a safe room far away from him. Dr. John Penn, that is, when he said this has to mean something, when Jesus said there's 12 hours in a day since he's the creator, and then he actually found references to where nighttime was not included. But let's say, so we include it. And of course, he had said, as I've referenced in other videos, he said there's a formula in here. So J. Sidlow Baxter acknowledged Sir Robert Anderson's fulfilled prophecy to the day. Famous theologian, philosopher. Sam Harris, very recent, much notoriety, said that William Lane Craig causes his most formidable colleagues, a lot of distress because he has very serious arguments, well developed. But now, certainly, much about whatever these men otherwise believe is not the point of this conversation. I'm showing you how you take these categories. And then, of course, back to John the Genius. Well, then you take approximately 12,500 years. And remember the ratio of 1 day to 1,000 years. And then, of course, 1,000 years to 1 day. You notice that inverse relationship. So let's just do that. So now we have 12,500 years at 24 hours. And we multiply that by, let's start with our days, 360. That gave us the 4.5 million. You remember, he would not consider it serious study when we use words like young or old and that we don't define it. So we define the term chronological and this geological. Now you remember, atheists aren't accustomed to coming across someone that uses their Bible. Now you can gather all this just from English. We're not, as Dr. Penn says, if we're not helping people learn how to use their Bible, then what are we doing? So continuing on, this gave us 4.5 million days, which when multiplied by 1,000 years equal 4.5 billion years. And again, that's compounded. That's compounded decay. Dr. Alan Mohler was giving a lecture trying to explain why the earth appeared so old, the severity of its decay is that to which he was making reference. Well, it's because decay is exponential. Well, then when we go this direction, 4.5, multiply it by 1,000 days. Remember, we're going from years now back to days. Well, that is approximately 2.78 360-day years. So that gives us 12.5 billion years. Now that's years of compounded decay. Why I say compounded? Because that's what Euler's number, E is 2.718281828 something. Anyway, so you can see how by just using integers, whole numbers, third grade arithmetic, and then noticing compound interest is easy. You can look that up on YouTube where people show you that. But the point is can we sit down, take, and target categories? So these 5. Let's say we took the holistic approach. We even took the history and even religion. And our Bible text that gave us a prophecy, we took the history of how it's been approached by opponents. They omitted it from their book because they believe it. And we took mathematicians, those who were involved in inventing one of the 3 branches of theology, which means science is theological and evolution is not scientific. So that's hilarious if you sit down and show this. Take chronographers like Usher, he worked on dating. So Robert Anderson stayed with the Bible knowledge and the prophecies. But there's great interest in this, in trying to show, is the Bible credible? So yes, it's credible when you speak of young earth. They have a great chronological argument of the chronological reality of the earth. And they have an extraordinary argument about the geological implications and an exponential measure of the exponential decay of the earth as a result of compound adverse effects of sin. So you see these 5 categories. That's what we were doing. This is what the lesson's about. This is just an application. So for people who use their Bible, the God debate is dead. You know, the famous God is dead came out, and then movies came out later, God's not dead. And, well, the God debate, there's millions of views out there, something titled the God debate, but the God debate's dead. And if you couldn't notice that there's no probability, there's no calculation that would give a number large enough that would encompass the probabilities embedded within all of this, that a book that was written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors, over half a dozen genres of scripture. And when I say I'm talking about the English Bible, someone said, so you're saying the King James Bible's inspired, because I'd said proof of inspiration. J. Sidlow Baxter said that. Well, it was never intentional, but the only English Bible, only book I've ever called the Bible, because when I was studying, nothing was keyed to anything except the King James Bible. So yes, if I'm saying proof of inspiration, and I'm using all this logic and all this rationale and all this arithmetic and these 5 categories, what else were we using? What were they using? We only have, that's the last book we have in history before we enter our modern world, if you call it, and where we have technology and computers and whatever. So when all this came to be, what we know as the branches of science, which originated from theology, which came from the Bible, that was prior to technology. So in here is where all of this happened. And this way, when I'm speaking of the last English Bible, that's the one I'm referring to. And no, it was not intended, and it certainly wasn't something John the Genius was up to get into a for or against the King James Bible. Rather, it was, can we use it? And is it a credible book? And can we say proof of inspiration? Because if that's true, then what the Bible asserts and affirms is credible and true. And it certainly posits and puts atheists, plural, in quite a light. But the intention is not to win the argument against them, it's to win them. Show them what they may not have noticed. Show them that there was to the day a prophecy. Show them that one formidable religion here to this day is still debunking that, still arguing against that, even arguing against the 360-day year. There's Judaizers, Jews for Judaism, and they argue against this. Well, you can see why. Because the implications of the accuracy of this number and the knowledge of it totally nullifies their rejection of Christ and atheist rejection of God. So you have a good day, a blessed day, and let me back out of the way and let you look at it. But this is how you would apply this, because if you ever were in a consultative session with Dr. John Penn, for example, he can say so much, and I would literally record it, re-listen to it, get to Dr. Johnson as fast as possible on the phone, face-to-face. Lord willing, we have 2 scheduled conferences next week where we'll speak to collaborate with each other. So you want to find a way to put all this together, and this is how you can do it, and it's really doable. So enjoy this lesson.